This is Jeremiah. We're right back with a little bit of history as to what is this apostasy falling away, and what what are some of the foundations of this movement and of the emerging church now, and all of these new, obviously aligning themselves with the Jesuits and the Catholics and a lot of these Mormons and demonic witnesses and all of these people that are on the fringe, all of these fifth column people. And we're going to expose a little bit of history here. I'm going to expose, when I say we, I mean Father is with me all the time. I was praying one day and one of my relatives said, "You're talking to yourself." I said, "I never talk to myself." Emmanuel means God is with me. I'm talking to Father when I'm talking. He's listening to me. Therefore, I'm never talking to myself. When you pray, you're not talking to yourself. It doesn't mean that talking to yourself can be bad. It can't be bad. It can be bad. That's not my point. My point is that when you're talking and you know that Father's listening, you're not talking to yourself. And if somebody tells you they are, that means they don't know God and they don't love God. That's the point. And that's very sad, that they don't have time to talk with Father and enjoy the love of Jesus Christ. That's horrible. There are a lot of people like that in America, even though they have "In God We Trust" on their license plate here in the United States. The whole idea of Christianity is to know Jesus Christ personally and to know his love. One of the popes here recently just said that you can't love and know God. That's what he said, which is the number one goal of Christianity. So that makes him what? That makes him an enemy to the church. In spite of the fact he's wearing some giant cross that's 12 feet high around his neck, that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that he is loving Jesus Christ and knows God. Just because I can put a big giant cross on me, that doesn't mean anything. There's a lot of churches around here that have crosses on them. Scientology has a cross on their building. And it's obviously a CULT for anyone with half a mind, unless you're a zombie. Now let's get going. We made a bedrock here for the history of England and the world as pertaining to the Vatican and them being given power. Remember, the Bible says in the book of Revelation that God gave power to the beast. And he gave power to the beast a long time ago, because the devil is telling Almighty God in the wilderness near Jerusalem, he's telling him that he has absolute power over the earth. And he's telling the person who gave him the power. This is very significant. The person who gave the devil the power over the earth, and he gave him the earth for 6,000 years. Now, the reason he gave him the earth was for a lot of reasons. One of them is to take people who come to Jesus Christ and to have the devil come and harass the living daylights out of them and to perfect them. And to see if they really love God by having alternatives to loving God. The devil is an excellent choice for someone to have, in terms of their volition, to have right in your face to select the dark side, or the recent Star movie in America here, to go on the dark side or go on the light side. There you go. If there's no dark side, you can't choose the dark side. That's the point. So God wants these entities to exist, right? He wants murderers to live in this city here. I was at the Speedway gas station, and a man came in with his pants all the way down, and I'm from the hood. I could tell that guy wanted to probably hurt somebody. I don't want to say murder, but he wanted to hurt somebody. He was angry at his parents, being in jail or something. There's some very good boots on the ground reasons why these young men want to hurt people. They're hurting themselves, a lot of them. But here's the point. He came in there with his pants all the way down, and he was angry at the world. He's probably already hurt somebody or murdered someone. We won't go into that, but because we have a lot of murderers around here. And the point is, he came into the store and he was wandering. He looked at me, but fortunately for me at that time, he looked at me and he turned away from me. If he would have fixed his eyes on me, it could have been bad for me in terms of my life, because I'm from the hood. I know the modus operandi of the devil. I know how he walks and talks. And in the hood, the gang members are 10 times worse than any police officer ever was. There are bad police, but it's 100 to 1. You do not want to run into a gang member. You're much better off running into a police officer who is not a nice police officer. And there aren't very many of them, but there are. But you're much better off running in, and I run into both of them. I have some hood experience in the hood, and you want to run into a bad police officer more than you want to run into a gang member. Big time. A bad police officer, he can be appeased maybe. If you talk to them properly, you might get away with not being hurt when they're in the mood for hurting, because that's what humans do. Humans get in the mood for hurting people. Unfortunately for them, they're going to probably be held accountable for that and not forgiven for hurting people. You understand what I'm saying? But here's the point. The officer or the gang member, you want the officer in general. Because gang members, they go on very harmful tours, and they do it often. And once they fix their eyes on you and so forth, it could be over. It's all over. This gentleman came into the store, and then I saw his accomplice. He had a woman driving the vehicle, and the woman was not looking at anyone, which means she is aiding and abetting. She's probably not a murderer herself or someone who wants to hurt people. She was the driver. I looked at the woman driving the car, and it was though she didn't want to look at anybody. Now, God lets these people wander around, and what they do is it's basically their world. That's the point. And we are here to enjoy the world as much as we can. We're not here to discount that. It's just that the reality is that car accidents, gang members, politicians, and starting wars now, which is really one of the ugliest things I've ever seen as a human being. American congressmen and so forth pushing for nuclear annihilation right now, which is really strange. I would have never thought that we would see so many politicians say that let's go ahead and defend a small country by annihilating the entire world. This is very strange. But let's continue with the lesson. England is a two-party system. So when America started, we had new land. We had a new opportunity for people like the Pilgrims, who called themselves saints, and of course we had William Penn coming here and of course establishing Pennsylvania. Now, God wanted the Vatican and the evil entity of the Catholic entity, which is called a synagogue of Satan, he wanted them to establish groundwork here also. Because he always wants in general, God wants two groups to be near each other so that things can happen that he wants to happen. He doesn't want William Penn and the Pilgrims to establish a country where there are no wicked people and they're all wiped out. He doesn't want that. Now, let's get back to let's get the Penn and the Pilgrims, okay? Now, this is Jeremiah with New Covenant. We're going to continue with this. We greet you in the only name. Let's get going. When they landed here in the 16th century with Pocahontas and John Smith and these people, what we had was slaves in the South, and in the North we had people who minded their own business like Abraham Lincoln. They didn't want slaves. They thought that Africans were people and they weren't less than human. And then in Washington, D.C., the Supreme Court determined that Africans were 20%, 40% animal. So this became a big problem in America. So that we had two groups of people. Washington agreed with the South a lot, and that's unfortunate. However, the northern people here, who were children of William Penn and the Pilgrims, they were what's known as the salt of the earth here. And that's very significant because In spite of a lot of people in the South being unconscious zombies, you know, they weren't conscientious people. They weren't conscious. They lived in a world like a robot. They didn't have a heart, and that's where a lot of people in the South were. Now, fortunately, in the North, we have the star pupils, which is why people say America is perhaps the greatest country in the world. Well, what makes that statement valid are the Amish and the Quaker people. That's the point. Because in Maryland and in Washington and in the South, we have a lot of Jesuits, Catholics, we have a lot of racist people, we have a lot of people abusing people with banks and finances, and so forth and so on, and Scooby-Dooby-Dooby. But we here in Indiana, who are Quaker types, we don't really have much to say or to acknowledge pertaining to these people and these entities, such as Catholicism, the Jesuit vow, and the Quran, and all of these books that teach malice. We don't know that much about it. We don't want to know that much about it. There's a man on the web right now who's going through the Quran and itemizing why it's such a bad book. Well, we Quakers, we don't really have a lot of time for that. And one reason is because we already have enough information as to the Jesuit vow, as to the Quran, as to Karl Marx, as to Engels and all these people who write books about it's okay to murder people, who are capitalists and all these kinds of books. We already know that it's evil, and we don't have that much time for it. That's my point. As a Bible teacher, I don't have a lot of time to discuss all of the evils of the world. We don't have time for it. Now, we will cite a few things. I do have a couple of videos on my previous channel for those of you who are interested, where I go into Babylon, I go into the Vatican, I go into a little bit of history pertaining to all of these bad people. Now, what's germane to this lesson is the people that came to the United States, and a little bit of history, how where they came from and how they were financed and so forth. Because when America started this country in the White House, it was named after Andrew White, who was a Jesuit, who was probably a very evil man. He probably took the Jesuit vow. If you've ever read the Jesuit vow, you would know why the Catholics joined Hitler. You would know why they joined, why they became partners. It's called the Concordat, and 1933, I think. So we can see the history of this organization. Now, God allowed them to make a stronghold because the White House was owned. It was leased to George Washington. So a Jesuit who said he hates Protestants gave the capital to a semi-Protestant man named George Washington and his buddies, who were semi-Protestants. They're not necessarily all of them full-blown Protestants. I don't think all the guys in the Burgess house, Thomas Jefferson was not a full-blown Christian. Obviously, Benjamin Franklin was not a full-blown Christian. Thomas Jefferson's best friend, Matthew Howard, was not a full-blown Christian either. He was just a guy who was patriotic and a nice guy. Let's put it that way. And he had enough sense to realize if we don't get these British people off our back, we'll never have a normal life. That's what the American Revolution was about. Now, we have these two powers that started this country in the 13 colonies, and then when Betsy Ross made the first flag and so forth, we have two entities that are developing in this country, and they're side by side. Now, fortunately for us in northeastern United States, we have a group of people called Quakers and Amish people and Mennonites, etc., even into Canada. There were large groups of people, even in Canada, southern portions of Canada. But you can't even live, I don't think, in northern parts of Canada. It's too cold. But they had a lot of people, some of them were Germans, who came here, and they started Christian communes, and they had what we call Quaker-like civilizations or groups of people, demographics. So the northern part of the United States, northeastern part, became what's known as God's country. In other words, we have what people, when they say that America was one of the greatest countries in the world, in southern Canada and so forth, we had some of the greatest groups of people to ever live, especially during the Christian era, 2,000-year period of Christ's church. So we won't argue with that. and we have evidence, and we have people, boots on the ground, who verify that statement. And I wanted to point it out to you, that it's verified by people who are true, law-abiding, neighbor-loving people. In the northern parts of the United States here, in the eastern part, northeastern region, we have a large group of people who have never bowed the knee to lies and confusion and Catholicism and Mormonism or any cult, C-U-L-T, which is also called a heresy, which is also called apostasy. In other words, we have a large group of contingency of people here who don't know that much about evil, they don't know that much about the Vatican, and they don't care to know, and they don't necessarily need to know, is my point. As to the other side of the sky, who the bad politicians are affiliated with, where they get their money from, and what are their ties to Zelensky and his Nazi army or something. All of this is just something that we don't necessarily want to spend that much time on. That's my point. I'm giving a very brief look into these entities, and I'm making a point about the apostasy and why so many people have turned away from the basic Christian doctrine of the Protestant. Why do they do it? Where are the roots of all of this? Why have the masses turned away from the simple doctrine of Christianity, and how did it happen? I'm giving you the bedrock right now. The foundation is that the country was never one United States under God. That's the point. That's mythology. There's never been United States. Now, they have been united on certain levels, but there's never been, when the South freed the slaves, there was still no, what's what I'm looking for? There was still no, there was no one group. The United States has never been united thoroughly, and it never will be. So America has never been united. And in the inception of the United States, what we have at the beginning, we have two worlds. When Washington leased the White House and they put Jupiter on top of the building, you can see the pagans all over the place in the initiation of this country. There are a lot of pagan symbols. I think Jupiter is on top of the Capitol. Okay, and the worship of Mary is a big part of the initiation of this country, which is an abomination. It's integral to the movies of the United States, where I have a movie with Cary Grant, where him and Deborah Carr, they kneel before Mary and start talking to Mary and stuff. Well, Mary's basically dead, so we have people talking to dead people in our American movies. Is that good for you? Is that it can't be good for you, is my point. I have news for you, it's not good. So we already had this bipartisan kind of thing where we're all on the same page, but we're not on the same page. That's my point. Now, let's get deeper into this. What did William Penn the Pilgrim have to do with these two groups? They're very significant because both of these groups are running away from their responsibility in terms of Christian doctrine. In other words, the Pilgrims ran here, and so did William Penn, and they were running away from persecution. Now, should they run away from persecution is the issue. Should you go somewhere and establish a country where you have some sort of laws and rules of kindness and love your neighbor, and it's self-evident that all men are created equal? Should you do that is the point. Is it biblical to do that? Is it biblical for William Penn? His wife actually, according to my records, his wife was the one that suggested that he establish a country somewhere else full of Quakers without being abused by the magistrates at this time in England, who were tied into, guess who? The Vatican. They were tied into them physically and financially, and they were tied into them philosophically. that in spite of the Magna Carta, they took away the rights of the poor, and especially those who are saying that all men are created equal. This becomes a big issue. William Penn tried to bring that point across, and he was knocked out in the witness stand when he was arrested. Then the jurors were also locked up because they found him innocent. Point is this is war, and it's always been war. Now, should William Penn do this, is the point. Should the Pilgrims come here? Shouldn't they just stay there in England and be side by side with the enemy and just look forward to being with Jesus Christ as their home, which is essentially what Christianity is? Are they leaving their responsibility of obeying the commandments of Jesus Christ, which is go into the world and be part of the world? That's the point. And the answer is yes and no. I'm going to explain that in a moment, okay? We have commandments of Jesus Christ, these red letters I'm looking at right here. He is the one who tells us what to do. William Penn does not tell us, neither do the Pilgrims, neither does Pocahontas and Captain John Smith. These founders, and of course, definitely not the Jesuits in Catholicism. They definitely don't tell us what to do. We Protestants. They have defined us as their enemy, and in a way we are their enemy because we preach them as being evil, and they don't want us identifying them as evil. They want us to identify them as okay, like Hollywood did. Hollywood inserted a lot of Catholicism as though it was normal Christianity, or they actually knew God or something like that. Calling them reverend and all of these father titles, which they should have never done. Because a lot of the people who are making these movies are tied to Protestantism. That's my point. Let's get to your boy, William Penn, for a moment. He's being persecuted along with his brethren, in spite of the fact that his father was friends of the king, which is where he got his money to come over here and establish the state of Pennsylvania. The king is a psychotic dude. He's a decent guy on many levels, but he's also a wild dude, and he doesn't stand up for what's right all the time, the king. Now, here's what's going on. He comes over here and establishes a state. Now, first of all, is it right or wrong? Well, it's right and wrong. There's nothing wrong with him wanting to establish a country separate from these magistrates who are tied into the devil, because that's essentially what they are. They're abusive people, so they're tied into the other abusive people who are one entity. That's the point. They're one group of people, although they be in different places. They're evil. They're not nice people. They're mean people. They're greedy and they're selfish. So that's the prototype that he wants to get away from. So William Penn comes here, and what does he do? He establishes a state. There are problems, the Indians and all, but he's very successful. He even brings some furniture there to build a place for his wife. He leaves his wife in England. So he comes back after a duration there, I forgot how long, and so he comes back home. Guess what happens when he first gets there? His wife gets sick and she dies. William Penn goes into manic depression. He obviously loves his wife very much. Now, what happens after that is we learn something right away when his wife dies. That there is no escaping God allowing trouble in your life. That's the first premise. That no matter what William Penn tries to do, or the Pilgrims, or anyone, whatever you try to do when you're a Christian, you cannot remove the chastening and the perfecting process of the potter's wheel, of you being spun around and being perfected and going through some very difficult circumstances as the Lord has deemed necessary, which is the same thing as acquainted with the sufferings of Jesus Christ. He's going to allow the same difficulties that he had, and the same cup he has to drink, you're going to have to drink the same cup. And for William Penn and the Pilgrims, to seek to establish something demographically, geographically, whereby they're going to escape that is what's wrong with Penn and anyone else who tries to do that. That's the point. And that's what gave the groundwork for the apostasy, was the fact that the founding people of this country, what they were trying to do was not, it wasn't all bad is the point. What they were doing was not evil or 100% wrong. It's okay for you to want to go somewhere and have peace with your family. That's the point. Here's the problem. The problem is it sets up an apostasy. And the reason why is because you're not teaching the commandments that God has ordained every person who is born again to enter into difficulties and trials that are ordained by God. And if you establish a country or a city where it's brotherly love, and you think that that's going to remove the commandments of Jesus Christ, then you're wrong. Same thing with the Republicans. It's the same thing right now, whereby the people are trying to take this American dream. They're trying to take this ideology of removing the commandments of the red letters here and trying to establish some sort of religious posture. And it's not going to work. Now, it doesn't mean that what William Penn, the Pilgrims did was all bad. The problem was when they got here to start to implement some sort of Christianity whereby you're not emphasizing the commandments to take up a cross. And this becomes the essence of the falling away. Because the people who are falling away are looking for any excuse they can in order for them to push away the living bread of the commandments. Now, unfortunately, they're going to die because they're pushing away the commandments to humiliation. It doesn't mean that Penn and Quakers pushed away all the commandments to a cross and a yoke and to push away the acceptance of the fellowships of the sufferings of Jesus Christ. That's not the point. The point is that what they're doing fundamentally is doing that by not integrating the commandments of the red letters here. That's what gave birth to the apostasy in America. It started a long time ago. It started in England. England was bombed in 1939 or so, 38, by bombs that didn't even have. Hitler sent giant bombs over the English Channel, and they just landed anywhere. It was horrible. You could be sitting in your living room and your house blows up. It's called the Blitz. It's horrible. And one of the reasons why they probably had to deal with that was because they were a backslidden country that thought that they could have William Shakespeare and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and they could be some sort of a aristocratic country of honor and decency without the commandments of Jesus Christ. This becomes a problem because even though Englanders are decent people in general, they were not on fire for the gospel. They were not on fire for the commandments of Jesus Christ. And this is a problem. We have a lot of nice, very nice people who are loving, caring people, who are decent people, but they're not teaching the commandments of Jesus Christ. That's the profile of England. So when God gets lukewarm people who are decent people, he's going to get your attention. That's the point. So America was a country that was founded by a lot of people who were running away from their responsibility. Your responsibility is to endure persecution, and even though it was a good idea with Mrs. Penn to escape persecution and trouble, William found out that you can't escape trouble by going to America and establishing a colony. Because when he got home, he found the biggest trouble he ever had, which was the woman he loved dearly is going to die. So to try to run away from tribulation and persecution, which is what America's kind of founded on, it's called wrong answer. Once again, it's not 100% wrong to the American dream. That's not the point. Because if you do establish a country, and let's go there. If you do establish a country where you have Constitution, 10 Commandments, and you say in God we trust on your license plate, it's obviously going to be better for you as a country and as a citizen in general. That's obvious. However, it does not negate the commandment to drink the cup of Jesus Christ. Which Mrs. Zebedee said, John's mother said, I'll drink the cup. Jesus asked John's mother, will you drink the cup that I'm going to drink and enter into the same difficulties that I'm going to enter into, which verifies you're going to heaven? She said, I'll drink the cup. She manned up, if you will. Now, is William Penn and the Pilgrims manning up, and our American Republicans manning up a little bit here? I would say, wrong answer. Does it mean that the nice Republican people are not good people, and we care about them, and we want to get their wagon fixed? We do. And we Protestant Bible teachers, that's our job, to get their wagon fixed. They're rolling along on 3 wheels a little bit here, and we're here to give them the 4th wheel so they can get their act together. And you get your act together by teaching the living bread which came down from heaven, which is take up your cross, John's mother. You want your sons to go to heaven? Are you willing to do what you got to do? No running and hiding and seeking deliverance somewhere. Let's go over there. I want the American dream. It's mine. I want it. And all of this. Well, what is your dream? Is your dream in line with the red letters of this Bible? Yes or no? Well, it just so happens, it's essentially the dream is not right. It's not wrong necessarily, but it's not right. That's the point. I'll be right back with my last segment of this. Maranatha.